Hi, welcome to the Dieku podcast. Sorry for the technical difficulties as we go to welcome Albie. Albie, welcome to the game pitch.
Thank you very much. It's great being here, and I've apologized once before, but I'll do it again live. I'm sorry to have you wake up this early. We're in a very different time zone, and I'm sorry the sun hasn't even risen where you are. Apologies.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on, and it's 8 a.m. here in Calgary, Alberta. And what time is it there in
it's 4
the UK?
p.m. 4 p.m.
4 p.m.
And I'm in Italy.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay, I did not know that. That's great. So first of all, we are here to talk about The Stars Will Guide You Home. And let's get right into talking about your game.
Absolutely. So you mentioned before this stream that you've never really covered a solo journaling game. Is that right?
That's right.
So I'll go into it very, very briefly. So a solo journaling game tends to be of the RPG mold. Is basically a solo game in which you are answering prompts and you're kind of expected to develop a story by answering those prompts. It can be as little as a couple of lines. You can voice record. A lot of people just do theater of the mind and think about things. But the idea is that the solo journaling game, will present you with prompts. And then you develop the story. And then when the mechanics present you with the next prompt, you take the story that you've thought of so far and you twist it and you warp it and you spin it according to the next prompt. So you're kind of being guided along. It's often referred to as a creative writing exercise with mechanics on top, which it can be if that's what you want to take from it. But it's the kind of game that sort of captured my imagination the most over the last couple of years. And These Stars Will Guide You Home will be my 5th solo journaling game. And as the slide says, it's inspired by the epic poems of the Odyssey and the Aeneid, more the second one. But I'll get into the differences between the two and where they come from. But I mean, these are some of the oldest stories that we have. And so they are just the perfect fit for inspiration for solo journaling. Now, in this particular game, I have this thing when I design where I tend to divide the game in 2 phases. And this has happened before with the Royal Cartographer. It kind of happened with Superstition, my first Zine Quest game. And this game is divided in the journey, so the actual events that your crew goes through. You are the captain of a fleet of 30 ships running away from something. In the Odyssey and the Aeneid, it's Troy at the end of the siege. And so the game has you going through a very mysterious archipelago looking for your new home. I'll get more into that later, but the second phase of the game happens 100 years after this journey is complete. And it's asking a descendant of the crew that was on the fleet to write the story, except a lot of things change in 100 years. And so what are the stories that have survived the test of time? What are the stories that are still remembered and just need to be written down? How have they changed? And also what's changed in the meantime that might have you look at the journey and the experiences in a different way? So it's a bit of a historiography of the journey that you played in the first phase of the game. In fact, I recommend playing the 2 phases with like maybe a week apart, so you can kind of begin the forgetting process yourself, as opposed to just having the game impose it on you with mechanics.
Well, that's an interesting kind of concept. And then you end up kind of reminiscing and reflecting, obviously, about your journey and trying to put it into context of what you went through. And first of all, beautiful artwork. I love the artwork, and I know we're going to talk about it later, but who did that, just so that we can...
So his name is Fernando Salvaterra. He's a Brazilian artist. You might have seen his art in Inspire Isles and Over Isles by Hatchling Games, where he drew loads and loads of hexes of floating islands, and those really caught my eye. And I actually tried to work with him last year for the Royal Cartographer, but he was too busy at the time. And this time I contacted him months in advance, and he's been knocking it out of the park. Literally just this morning, I received another 4 islands that he's drawn, and he's really nailing the sort of weird ancient Greek aesthetic, But this front cover is just another level. I mean, when I saw this, and you should see the description I sent to him first. It was very broad. Like, he could have gone anywhere with it. So the fact that he managed to take my very jumbled words and turn it into this, fantastic. Like, can't recommend working with Fernando enough. Amazing.
And I think I covered his Hexa League, and if I'm pronouncing that right, booklet or zine on the Halloween month. So yeah, really good work. And let's talk about a little bit about some of your inspirations.
So obviously an epic journey. You're in ancient Greece or something similar to it, and you are sailing through this mysterious archipelago. And so the two main stories that come from that are the Aeneid, which takes the character of Aeneas from the Iliad, and then was written by Virgil in Roman times. So it's a bit of a propaganda piece. And I'll focus on this one first because it's the bigger inspiration, despite it being less well known than the Odyssey. Everybody knows the Odyssey, right? Ulysses and his amazing travels. But the main difference is that Ulysses in the Odyssey walks away from Troy as a winner, and he's going back home. He knows where he's going. He's going to Ithaca to find his wife. Aeneas in the Aeneid doesn't. He lost. He was on the losing side of the war, right? And when he sets off, he doesn't know where he's going. He's looking for home. He's looking for a place to settle. And then in Roman propaganda, that he effectively becomes Rome's grandfather and founds the dynasty that will then found the city that will then turn into the empire, right? So it's a bit of a propaganda piece. But in the Aeneid, he sets off with his ships and he's thinking, I don't know where we're going. Let's just go and find a home. And I find that so interesting because he doesn't know what he's going towards and he doesn't know what he's looking for, really. He just knows that he needs to find something to settle down. Troy is no longer. And I find that fascinating. I've done a lot of traveling in my life. I've sort of felt that feeling. And mechanically, this is going to sound like a cheat. Mechanically, it was easier to say, you don't know what you're looking for than it was to say, your home is somewhere, but you need to find it. That was a more complex game and a more interesting story. So the majority of the inspiration is this. You're running away from somewhere. You can't go back. You don't know what you're looking for. And mechanically, that turns into a push your luck mechanic, which I'll talk about later. And then the big one is the Odyssey. This is an inspiration more because of how surreal the adventures Ulysses goes through are. You know, there's witches that turn all his crew into pigs. There's Scylla and Charybdis, and he has to sail through them. There's the Cyclops, the one-eyed giants. And that was kind of the vibe I'm going for with the game. So the archipelago we're not sure it exists, and it's weird. Are we in the same reality? Things have gone a little bit odd here compared to what we know. And so it's less about the story of Ulysses and more about the vibe, the vibe of the Odyssey that I was really going for. So the mix of those two is what brings us to These Stars Will Guide You Home.
I kept thinking about the Jason and the Argonauts stop motion movie. I don't even know when that came out. I don't know if you've ever seen it with the skeleton battle. Yeah, it just kind of has could have that feel to it. But
I need to write this down. Stop motion movie. Well, I love those to begin with. So,
well, it's a classic if you can find it. It's on YouTube, I'm sure.
All right, I'll look it up. And then two more recent inspirations. So 1,000-Year-Old Vampire is possibly the better known solo journaling game right now, in which you play a 1,000-year-old vampire. And without getting into spoilers, one of the main mechanics is that the vampire lives for so long that some of the memories of his life just start to fade, and it asks you to delete those memories. So things you've written about throughout, the prompts and the story that you're creating, at some point you're asked with saying, okay, these two, choose one, you're forgetting the other, it's been too long, which is a wonderful play on memory. And it's the kind of thing that you don't really think about when you're thinking about vampires, but it's totally possible that you would just, forget a loved one, forget a massive event that you lived through because you've been alive for too long. And then Sunless Sea is a video game by Fail Better Games, and that is two things that inspired me. One, it's got the same kind of weird vibes as the Odyssey has, where you've got this very sort of Victorian horror, but slightly odd kind of setting. And then this is a segue into the mechanics. Sunless Sea, every time you play it, all the islands in the Sunless Sea move. So you don't know whether that particular island is still going to be due northwest of your starting point. It might be somewhere completely different. And that changes the game entirely, because what might have been an easy trip to go and explore a particular island is now on the opposite side of the world. And how does that change the story? Which is kind of what I was going for in the mechanics. So those two are more recent, and they mostly inspired mechanics and, again, the kind of feel I wanted to get from the game.
And circling back to your solo game kind of journey, when you started looking into solo games, was that the first game that you played, 1,000-Year-Old Vampire, or did you?
It was the third. It was the third game I played, because my journey into solo games started off with The Wretched by Chris Bissett, the one you play with a Jenga tower. You're off in space. You have to pull blocks from a Jenga tower. And the second one I played was Artifact by Mousehole Press, which is very much an inspiration, because it's about history. Again, it's about the history of an object as it goes through various owners, and how history changes, and history is changed by the object and by you writing the story as you go along. So they were very seminal in starting me on this journey, and you can see that the ideas have lived throughout all the games that I've designed since then. And then 1,000-Year-Old Vampire was number 3.
And also, you seem to have like a really strong knowledge of history. And are you trained in that area at all, or just a passion?
No, just passionate. My training is in journalism, is in communications. So I like to talk about themes of how things are versus how stories are told about them. But the history bit is just something I'm passionate about, and I read a lot about, and my son is constantly asking for me to tell him stories, but they have to be real. They can't be made up. So I'm reading up a lot of history and trying to make it sort of bite-sized so my son will understand it, but it has to be real. Like it can't be fiction. It has to be nonfiction. So mechanically, the main question that I set out to answer in this game is, if you're playing solo, how do you explore a world that feels like it exists whether you explore it or not? Because a lot of times in solo journaling games, what happens is you'll be asked to draw a card or roll some dice, and you look up a table and it says you found a mountain. And to me, that is very interesting mechanically, but it feels like the world was created at the moment I rolled the dice or the moment I drew the card. And most importantly, if I hadn't drawn the card, that forest or that mountain or that ruined city wouldn't have been there, right? It would have been something else. If I, at the last second, decided, nope, I'm drawing something else, then it's not like that thing continues to exist despite me perceiving it. So how do you make a world that exists beyond you? You basically have to do some writing. You have to do some creation beforehand, which is why Fernando and I are collaborating to draw 25 different islands, all of which have their own story, and you will be tasked with exploring them. But they exist regardless of what they're always in the archipelago, regardless of whether you find them or not. So you could get to the end of the game and be like, oh, I've seen 4 islands, but there were probably a lot more. I wonder what they were doing. I like that feeling of being in a world that exists beyond yourself. And then the second question I set out to answer was, how do you simulate sort of the passage of time and the fact that that history forgets a lot of stuff, especially when it's oral history and you have to write something down. Events have been twisted in the meantime. People forget. The Odyssey, I think Ulysses goes through about 16 islands. What if there were more, but the others were boring? or something like that, right? Or maybe they were more interesting, but simply no one remembered them when they wrote the poem down. That kind of thing I find really, really interesting. So that's what the game tries to set out to answer mechanically.
Cool. And you mentioned the shifting islands and the directional narrative. And so the layout is that well, you explained to me, how do you populate the hexes here?
So you can see that at the edge of the hexes, there's little lines with stars. So the player is tasked with filling those in. There are, in real life, it's not just the northern star you can use to navigate. There are 57 or 59 stars that if you use particular star charts, you can use them to figure out your position because they have ways of moving that are predictable. So at the beginning of the game, you basically do that. You fill out your sky. So on the left-hand side, you'll write the names of 5 stars. And on the bottom half, you will write the names of another 5 stars. And then as you explore this map of the archipelago, you will check the star chart and see which island that corresponds to. What that means is that next time, if you put the stars in a different order, the islands will all have shifted on the archipelago. And why does that matter? Because the islands are purposely written so that they have a directional narrative. For example, I think in the previous slide was the picture of a lighthouse. So the lighthouse is fixedly pointing northwest, right? So in the story, you might think, okay, why is it pointing that way? Let's go explore the next hex. You check your star chart. You see that it's a particular island. Fine. So what's the relationship there? It's up to you to invent that. But the relationship existed before you found out about it, and it would have existed if you hadn't. Next time you play this, you shift the stars around. You find the lighthouse still pointing northwest, but the island it's pointing to is now different. Now you've got a different story. Because the relationship between the lighthouse and where it's pointing to is something else. You've got a different story. It's a little bit of replayability. The game will also have a number of star charts, so you don't fall into the trap of knowing exactly which islands lie on which star. So there's added replayability. But the idea is that this archipelago exists from the moment you write the star names down, and then it's up to you to explore it.
And then you have a push your luck mechanic so that you don't have a mutiny on board?
Pretty much. So you're the captain of 13 ships. The crews of these 13 ships want to find home, and they want to find it pretty quick. Every time you decide to sail, or every time you set foot on an island, you have to flip a coin. And the result it gives adds a certain number to your crew's exhaustion. And you have to choose an island before the crew decides to kick you off and they choose an island themselves. So that's the islands are purposely written so that none of them are no one island is perfect. So you're going to have to make a subpar choice. And that's what's interesting about it, because you think, okay, I could push my luck and try to find one more island, or I could settle here. It's less than perfect, but if I do it one more time, the crew might just leave me here. And so there's a little bit of a push your luck mechanic to where are you finally going to decide this is your new home. And then the story that follows, obviously.
In your experience, how long of time commitment is this to play a game?
So I made it such that the exhaustion counter can end with as little as 4 encounters. So you could be done with this game in about, depending on how fast you're at, you could be done in an hour. And if you're lucky and your crew is very patient, it could last double that, because the counter goes up to 8. So you could be playing for as little as an hour to, if you want to really write a lot for everything you do, you could be playing up to 4 hours if you want.
Cool.
And then this is the epic phase. So after you've played the journey, a century passes. You roll a few dice to determine what the main event has been in the last 100 years, and also who you are. Maybe you're a descendant of the people in the crew. Maybe you're a descendant of the people who wanted to mutiny. So you'll have a different perspective on the choice that the captain made for the island. And as you play, you're drawing cards to determine the prompts. But in the next phase of the game, in the epic phase of the game, I basically ask the player to get rid of all of those apart from 3. And those 3 represent the stories that have survived 100 years. And so now you're going to have to write a story with possibly only event number 1, number 5, and number 8 of all the ones that you went through. So how do you make narrative if you know there are holes, but history has completely deleted what's in there? You know, how do you make a coherent story? Are you going to make stuff up? Are you going to admit that things have been lost? Or are you going to twist the narrative so it kind of makes sense only with 3 stories? And that was my commentary on historiography and how we're basically filling in the holes with our own imagination and then saying, oh, this is our origin story.
That's cool. So at the end of it, you have like a nice little artifact of your game.
Absolutely. You should have an illustrated map of all the islands that you found. You should have a captain's log of everything that's happened. And that's the real account of what's happened. And then you have the Iliad or the Odyssey or the Aeneid that was written 100 years later. And you'll be able to see the differences and how things have changed in the meantime. And only you really know what's happened because you played through the game. But it'll be a nice little artifact to say, this isn't exactly the story as it went. This is just the story as it was told.
And you are going to Kickstarter on February the 7th?
Absolutely. February the 7th, so the coming Tuesday, I'll be launching in about 2 hours from right now, so 6 in the evening, so I can sort of launch it and then not have to look at it for a couple of hours because obviously my nerves will be jangling a little bit. And basically the idea is the way the coordinates work, it needs at least 25 islands. And so most of the funds will be paying for those to be illustrated. And then obviously for the print run and the shipping costs. But all of that will be revealed on February the 7th. I can't wait to show you all.
And it is nerve-wracking for folks at home if you've not done a Kickstarter yourself when you actually go live and like you're throwing your work out there for the world to consume. And so to support indie designers, game developers, follow Albie on Itch and check it out on Kickstarter. All the links are in the show notes in the description below. And so when it goes live, you'll be notified and you can support the game.
All right. Thank you so much. Actually, the only thing I'll add is that this is the second time I've launched the game. I launched it by mistake about a month ago. Pressed the wrong button. I'm not doing that again.
Well, they don't make it easy. Their interface is not good. So sometimes when you think you're doing something and you're not meant to do it, and like they don't really protect you that well. So I can see I've had nerves about that too with a couple games that I've just got like in status mode right now, and I'm like, oh, if I hit the wrong button, things could go really wrong really quick.
Absolutely. It's just you have to scroll past the button to get to the buttons where you edit your campaign. So it's just, slip of the finger and it's done. It's launched.
And so after this game, do you have any other kind of ideas for future games? Are you already starting your next kind of iteration of things?
I have a couple of ideas for games. So I think the 2 ones that are that have worn their way into my brain, there's 2. One is using okay, this is the theme. You're the translator for a dynasty of global emperors, except they have been so far removed from the general populace that they don't speak the same language anymore. You are the translator that translates the emperor's speech to the rest of the world, but you're also part of the revolution. And so the idea is, how do you twist the emperor's speech just enough that he doesn't or she doesn't notice, but the revolution listening in will take it as a sign that you're on their side and that things are moving. So blackjack mechanic, again, push your luck, how far can you take it so people realize, but the emperor does not. That's the first one I've kind of got my head running about. And then the second one is to do with history again. I've been listening to a lot of history podcasts, and it's fascinating how the deeper down you go on an archaeological dig, the more things you find, and you have to revisit your idea of what you think happened to this particular place. So you might get to a strata where everything has been burnt. So you think, okay, maybe massive wildfire. And then you get to one underneath and you see another civilization. And then you get to another burnt strata and you think, okay, this is pretty regular now. Maybe there's a volcano, or maybe and the lower you go, the more evidence you find, but you're still only drawing the connections. And I think that's fairly easy to replicate with a deck of cards. So like the first 3 cards is the first layer of topsoil. You don't find much of interest there. Mm-hmm. Then the second 3 cards, you find the ruins of a civilization, and the following 3 cards, the ruins of another civilization. And depending on the cards that you find, it's different evidence that you find. Sometimes it's burned, sometimes it's a burial chamber, sometimes it's ruins of a palace. Okay, you're an archaeologist. How are you going to put that together? How are you going to string that into a coherent narrative? I would like to make that game, but I'm going to have to call up some archaeologist friends because it is way out of my sort of competence. It would have to be a collaboration to develop that game. I just think it's a very interesting concept, and I think it translates very easily to mechanics, but the actual content, I'd need an expert to sort of guide my way through there.
Well, that sounds interesting, and I have to say that this looks like a really solid solo gaming experience, and should be a lot of fun. And so, once again, February the 7th launches on Kickstarter. Everybody look at the show notes in the video description to find out where you can find out where to support Albie and his games. So, Albie, thanks for joining me. It's been a pleasure meeting you, and look forward to seeing more from you.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
And if you have a game that you want to pitch, just go to our website, diekugames.com, and tell them Game Pitch Gary sent you.
Hey friends, are you looking for a game that is not Dungeons or Dragons? Well, we got exactly what you need at Dieku Game Pitch. We got zines, we got OSR, we got adventures. But wait, there's more. We got solo games, we got journaling games, we even got card games and dice games. Oh hell, I don't even know what kind of game this is, but we got it. And if you visit us in the next 2 minutes, you're gonna get all the Zine Quest, Zine Month, Itch Fund and Backer Kits, Kickstarters that you can't handle. Visit us at www.diekugames.com and tell them Game Pitch Gary sent ya.